Oh shit, I forgot. How's this blood-soaked letter gonna burn?
My face goes flat, I'm wondering why.
The silence that hung over the north wing of Raynham Hall was not a passive lack of sound. It was an active, crushing weight. In those final days of her earthly confinement, Dorothy Walpole sat in the high-backed chair near the shuttered window, watching the dampness creep across the ceiling plaster in long, dark veins that resembled the branches of a winter bare oak. Her brown silk gown, once the height of London fashion, was now threadbare at the cuffs and stained with the dull grease of tallow candles. Her husband, Viscount Charles Townshend, had executed her erasure with a cold, political precision. To the court, she was buried in the family vault. To the household, she was a disgraced phantom, confined to 3 damp rooms, her name spoken only in hushed, frightened whispers by the kitchen maids who brought her cold broth once a day. Her isolation was absolute. She spent weeks listening to the internal rhythms of the house, the groan of the floorboards beneath the weight of the sea winds, the distant clatter of pewter in the lower kitchens, and the rare, agonizing sound of her children's voices drifting up from the courtyard below. She would press her face against the icy glass of the window, her breath fogging the small pane, trying to catch a glimpse of a small hand or a flash of a woolen coat. But the glass was thick and warped, distorting the world outside into a series of pale, melting shapes. Each missed moment with her children carved a hollow space within her chest, a cavity that filled gradually with a dark, stagnant fluid made of helplessness and mounting fury. When the fever finally arrived during the brutal winter of 1726, it found a body already thoroughly broken by despair. It did not take her swiftly. It burned through her veins over 7 agonizing days, turning her skin to cold wax and her throat to dry leather. Charles stood at the threshold on her final night, wrapped in his dark wool cloak, watching her chest rise and fall in shallow, liquid gasps. He offered no medical aid, no priest, and no gentle words. He stood with his pocket watch open in his palm, counting down the seconds until his quiet domestic scandal was permanently closed. As her heart gave its final, irregular flutter, Dorothy's consciousness did not scatter into the light. The agony of her trapped existence had rusted her soul to the very iron fittings of the estate. She felt herself drawn downward, dissolving into the ancient oak floorboards, soaking through the joists and expanding into the damp lime plaster of the walls. The physical pain of dying gave way to an absolute crystalline awareness of every corner of Raynham Hall. She was no longer a prisoner within the house. The house had become the physical shell of her unquiet spirit. In the early decades following her death, Dorothy learned the terrible mechanics of her new state. She was not a continuous, flesh-like presence, but a storm that gathered when the atmospheric conditions of human fear and grief reached a critical density. She learned to manipulate the temperature of the air, pulling heat from the grand hall until the tapestries froze solid against the stone walls. She discovered that her brown dress, the garment in which she had been locked away and forgotten, served as the core of her visual form. Her first true manifestation occurred during a heavy autumn downpour in 1755. A young groom, seeking shelter from the gale, had crept into the old north corridor to sleep on a pile of dry sacking. Dorothy gathered the mist from the damp foundations and stepped out from the solid wood of her former bedchamber door. She did not float smoothly. Her movements were characterized by a terrible, unnatural gliding that defied the mechanics of living bone. The air around the groom plummeted instantly toward freezing. As the young man woke, gasping As his lungs met the sudden wall of frost, he looked up to see a tall, veiled figure standing over him. Her brown gown rustled with the sound of dry corn husks. When she leaned forward and pulled back the dark folds around her head, the groom did not see a pale, sorrowful beauty. He looked directly into two deep, empty sockets, hollow caverns where fluid seeped down waxy, grey cheeks toward a wide, toothless maw that gasped for air that would never come. The groom's screams were cut short as Dorothy reached out, not with hands, but with the cold, crushing weight of her accumulated misery. She flooded his mind with the sensation of being locked in a dark, narrow space while the air slowly ran out. They found the young man at dawn, huddled in the corner of the courtyard, his hands raw from trying to dig through the cobblestones, his mind utterly shattered. He remained mute for the rest of his short life, staring blankly at any dark corner with wide, bloodshot eyes. As the 18th century turned into the 19th, the legend of the Brown Lady grew from a servant's tale into a terrifying reality that haunted the aristocratic guests of the Townsend family. The grand staircase became her primary domain, the very stairs her children had walked while she was kept locked above them, unable to reach out and touch their hair. In the winter of 1835, Colonel Frederick Marryat, a naval officer and author known for his firm belief in rationalism, arrived at Raynham Hall determined to disprove the existence of the phantom. He requested to stay in the room directly adjacent to the North Gallery and openly mocked the nervous glances of the house staff. He carried a loaded firearm at all times, boasting over evening cigars that no spectral vision could withstand a lead bullet. On his third night, the house was struck by a severe coastal storm. The wind rattled the high diamond-paned windows, and the oil lamps flickered violently in the drafts. Marryat sat up late, reading by the light of a single candle. At precisely midnight, the flame turned a sickly pale blue and sputtered out. A profound, suffocating cold filled the bedchamber. Marryat felt an oppressive weight land upon his chest, making every breath an agonizing struggle. He reached for his pistol on the nightstand, his fingers stiffened by the sudden, unnatural frost that coated the furniture. From the hallway came the distinct rhythmic scraping of heavy silk against oak. Step, drag, step, drag. Marryat threw open his bedroom door, raising the pistol into the darkness of the corridor. Standing at the far end of the gallery, illuminated by the harsh white glare of a lightning strike through the arched window, was the Brown Lady. She was moving slowly toward him. "Stand where you are!" Marryat bellowed, his voice sounding thin and hollow in the freezing corridor. The figure did not slow. She moved with an unnatural, terrifying speed, her brown gown swirling around her legs like dark liquid. As she drew within a few feet of the officer, she lifted her face. The moonlight caught the waxy, decaying skin of her jaw and the total, lightless voids where her eyes should have been. Her mouth opened, releasing a dry, rattling hiss that smelled of stagnant well water and rotted pine. Marryat pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed hallway, the flash illuminating the spectral features in vivid detail. The lead ball passed through her chest without resistance, embedding itself deep in the doorframe behind her. Dorothy did not flinch. She stepped forward, passing directly through the officer's body. Marryat dropped the gun as an absolute, paralyzing cold washed through his vital organs. He felt his mind overwhelmed by an ancient, suffocating agony, the feeling of screaming against heavy wood while soil was shoveled overhead. He collapsed onto the floorboards, his teeth chattering uncontrollably, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. When the servants rushed up the stairs, attracted by the gunfire, they found the skeptical colonel curled into a fetal position beneath the bullet hole, his eyes wide with an unutterable terror that he would carry to his grave. By the early 20th century, Rainham Hall had become a place of quiet, decaying grandeur, its grand rooms increasingly abandoned to dust and memory. Dorothy's presence remained constant, a dark, heavy thread woven through the fabric of the estate. Her rage had not softened with time. It had compressed into an absolute, unyielding malice toward anyone who dared disturb the quiet of her eternal tomb. In September 1936, two photographers from Country Life magazine, Hubert Provence and Indre Chirard, arrived at the estate to photograph its architecture. They set up their heavy plate camera at the foot of the grand staircase, adjusting the optics to capture the sweeping curve of the carved oak balustrade. The air in the grand hall was warm and quiet as they prepared the flash powder. But as Provence adjusted the focus cloth over his head, Chirard felt a sudden, violent drop in temperature. The breath left his lungs in a sudden, white plume. "Hubert, look!" Chirard whispered, his hand shaking as he pointed toward the upper landing. Ascending down the stairs was a luminous, veiled figure wrapped in heavy brown drapery. She moved without steps, descending the oak stairs with a slow, deliberate grace. Her face was obscured by an ethereal mist, but as she reached the middle landing, the light caught the dark, hollow voids of her eye sockets. Chirard frantically hit the flash lever. A blinding burst of magnesium light flared through the hall, filling the space with thick, sulphurous smoke. When the smoke cleared, the staircase was empty, but the cold lingered for hours, freezing the water in the glass vases nearby. When the glass negative was developed in the darkroom later that evening, the image was clear. A misty, veiled figure draped in a heavy, archaic gown, descending the stairs of Rainham Hall. The photograph became one of the most famous images of a ghost ever captured, published in newspapers across the globe. Yet to Dorothy, the photograph was not a simple capture of light on silver. It was an extension of her cage. Millions of people looked at her image, whispering of the ghost in the brown dress. But none knew the absolute, unyielding pain that had created it. She remained bound to the stairs, an eternal monument to a murder that was never recorded, and a life that was erased in the dark. She remains there still, in the cold, echoing silence of Rainham Hall. When the winter storms howl off the North Sea, and the old timbers groan beneath the frost, the temperature in the North Gallery drops. The scraping of heavy silk against oak echoes down the empty corridors, and the brown lady steps out from the shadows, waiting for the next living soul to cross her threshold and share in the endless, lightless horror of her eternal.
Can't see at all. And even if I could, it'd all be great. But your hatchet on my wall, it reminds.
The cobblestones of early 19th century London were slick with grease and grey with fog when Sarah Whitehead's world quietly fell apart. For years, her life had revolved around her brother Philip, a respectable, well-dressed clerk at the Bank of England. They shared a modest home and a quiet existence until Philip succumbed to the suffocating pressures of London's high-stakes financial underworld. Desperate to cover mounting debts, he dipped a pen into ink and forged a bank check, an act that the harsh laws of the era deemed a hanging offense. He was caught, tried, and swiftly sent to the gallows in 1811. Desperate to protect Sarah's fragile mind, her friends kept the horrific truth from her. But as the days bled into weeks and Philip failed to return home, Anxiety drove Sarah directly to the grand stone facade on Threadneedle Street. Stepping into the bustling bank, she asked the clerks for her brother. An oblivious employee, unaware of the family tragedy, casually broke the news that Philip had been executed. In that single, shattering second, something vital snapped inside Sarah's mind. She did not scream or weep. Instead, a heavy, permanent delusion settled over her. She went home, clothed herself in deep mourning attire, a heavy, sweeping black dress and a thick black veil that completely obscured her features, and began a tragic, lifelong ritual. Every single morning for nearly 30 years, the solemn silhouette of the woman Londoners called the Black Nun would glide through the city fog to the Bank of England. She would walk up to the counter and, in a soft, polite voice, ask the same heartbreaking question. "Have you seen my brother?" The bank directors, moved by pity, often slipped her coins. But as the decades wore on, her silent, grieving presence became too disruptive for business. Sarah died in 1840, broken and destitute, and was buried in the churchyard of St. Christopher le Stocks, right next to the bank. But the living could not leave her to rest. When the Bank of England expanded, it swallowed the cemetery whole, building its private, enclosed garden court directly over the graves of the dead. It did not take long for the sightings to begin. Sarah's spirit was not born of malice or evil, but of an eternal, unyielding grief that death itself could not dissolve. To this day, commuters rushing through the labyrinthine, tiled tunnels of Bank Underground Station occasionally feel a sudden, bone-chilling drop in temperature. Turning, they see a tall, dark shape, dressed in Victorian widow's weeds, gliding silently through the crowd without making a sound. Sometimes, she steps directly into the path of a solitary traveler. The heavy veil masks her face, but her voice is clear, echoing softly against the concrete walls as she asks the same polite question she asked 2 centuries ago. "Have you seen my brother?" When the startled commuter mutters a confused response, the figure instantly melts into the shadows, leaving only the scent of old dust and cold air behind. Deep within the heavily guarded walls of the Bank of England, where the public cannot go, her searching soul remains trapped. Late at night, security guards watching the monitors have seen a dark shadow pacing the stone pathways of the interior courtyard. Sometimes, the spectre stops, drops to her knees upon the very paving stones that covered her grave, and violently pounds her fists against the ground in a silent, agonizing display of sorrow. She is not there to harm anyone. She is simply a sister, lost in the fog of time, forever searching for a brother she will never find. If you want to discover more about this eerie history, I can share details about other spirits haunting the London Underground, or locate historical maps of the old churchyards beneath the bank. What would you like to explore next?